Hello, I'm Tom Wilkinson, and welcome to the Thinking in English podcast, a podcast for intermediate to advanced level English learners. Boris Johnson has resigned as Prime Minister of the United Kingdom, and somebody new will need to replace him. But who? We don't currently know who the next Prime Minister will be. So today, I'm going to try and explain why Johnson resigned, how the new leader will be chosen, and introduce some of the vocabulary needed to talk about British politics. You can find the full transcript for today's episode for free on the Thinking in English blog. Have a look at my Instagram page, Thinking in English Podcast, for some more content. Leave a like, a review, a rating, or a follow wherever you are listening right now. And there is a vocabulary list today, but it's at the end of the episode. Here is today's episode. Boris Johnson has announced his intention to resign as Prime Minister of the UK. After months of scandals, Johnson has officially left his role as the leader of the Conservative Party and will step down as Prime Minister once a replacement is found. For people from outside of the UK, our politics can be confusing. Why did Johnson resign? If he resigned, why is he still Prime Minister until September? What actually is the job of a Prime Minister? Is it the same as a president? How did the resignation happen? How will the next Prime Minister be chosen? Who will be the next Prime Minister? Today, I'd like to try and answer some of these questions. I'm going to explain, as best I can, the details about this part of UK politics. And along the way, I will introduce some useful vocabulary that you can all use to talk about Boris Johnson's resignation, the new UK Prime Minister, and perhaps even your country's politics. I think we should start right at the beginning. Boris Johnson resigned as the Prime Minister of the United Kingdom. But what actually is a Prime Minister? Well, the Prime Minister is the head of government in countries with a parliamentary political system. The term Prime Minister was originally an insult, and it simply means the first or most important minister in the government. If a country has a Prime Minister, they usually have separate heads of government and heads of state. For example, in the UK, the Queen is the head of state and the Prime Minister is the head of the government. In Germany, the President is the head of state and the Chancellor is the head of the government. The role of the Prime Minister developed in the 18th century. The King used to attend and lead meetings of government ministers. But eventually, the British monarch stopped attending these meetings, and instead, a senior minister took over their role. This senior minister was able to become influential and use the power of the executive instead of the king. Robert Walpole is generally considered to be the first real Prime Minister of the United Kingdom. In the UK, while in theory the Queen still appoints the Prime Minister, in practice it is always the leader of the largest political party in Parliament. The Prime Minister must be able to lead a majority of the politicians in the Parliament, and this is why the PM always comes from the largest political party, so long as that political party has a majority, over 50% of the members of Parliament. The Prime Minister is the leader of the cabinet. I mentioned this idea of a cabinet in an episode I recorded on the US Supreme Court a few weeks ago. But basically, the cabinet is a committee of senior ministers responsible for controlling government policy. And a minister is the head of a government department. So, the Prime Minister supervises and coordinates the cabinet. They supervise and coordinate the people responsible for government departments. Over the years, the role of the government has become more complicated, and the Prime Minister has tended to concentrate on the most high profile parts of politics. For example, foreign relations, defense, and economic policy. Now, this may sound quite similar to a president, but there are some key differences. First, the Prime Minister is still a member of Parliament. They attend Parliament and they vote on key decisions, just like any other member. And therefore, the Prime Minister also has a local area that they represent as a member of Parliament. Boris Johnson, for example, is the Member of Parliament for Uxbridge and South Ruislip, part of Greater London. Another key difference is how the Prime Minister is elected. To decide the President of the USA, every single American can vote. This is not the case in the UK. The Prime Minister is the leader of the biggest party in Parliament and is not decided by the whole country, but by their party. I'll talk more about this later on. But first, let's talk about why Boris Johnson resigned. There is no one simple reason to explain his resignation. 3 years ago, Boris Johnson led the Conservative Party to their biggest victory in a British election since 1987. The Conservatives clearly had a strong leader who was quite popular. So, what happened in the last 3 years? Scandals. So many scandals. I'm just going to mention two or three main ones, but there were many more. The main scandal, the direct scandal that led to Johnson's resignation, was to do with the MP Chris Pincher. He was appointed by Johnson to one of the most important roles in the government. But at the end of June, Chris Pincher went to a club in London and groped 2 men. Over the next few days, more and more accusations against Pincher came out. Apparently, he had been doing things like this for years and quite regularly. Now, Boris Johnson denied he had any knowledge of these accusations before he appointed Pincher to government earlier this year. Johnson also forced other senior politicians to go on TV and to state that the Prime Minister never knew anything about Chris Pincher's behaviour. This was untrue. It was revealed that Boris Johnson knew about Chris Pincher's behaviour and had been told about it in 2019. Boris Johnson had lied, and not for the first time. And for the Conservative politicians, this was the final time they were willing to accept the Prime Minister lying. While it might not seem like a big incident on its own, Johnson had been involved in so many other scandals that the Conservative MPs couldn't handle it. Other scandals included Partygate. Partygate is the name for the scandal involving the Prime Minister attending parties during the COVID lockdowns in the UK. I actually wrote something about this in January, so you can read it if you'd like to know more. Other scandals included trying to change the UK laws to stop a different MP from being punished, or his wife spending hundreds of thousands of pounds decorating the Downing Street where the Prime Minister lives by buying designer and artists' furniture rather than more affordable furniture. At the same time, the economy has been suffering, the UK has high inflation, the government raised taxes, and the government has no clear policies. There has been scandal after scandal, problem after problem, And eventually, the rest of the Conservative Party lost trust in Boris Johnson as leader. They decided that they needed someone else to be in charge. Over the course of 2 or 3 days, over 50 different ministers and advisors, including senior cabinet members, resigned from their roles and asked Johnson to quit. In the end, Johnson had no choice but to resign as well. So, Johnson has resigned, but he's not fully resigned yet. And this is what will probably confuse most people. If he's resigned, why is he still the Prime Minister right now? Well, I guess it's because the Prime Minister has those two different roles: the leader of the largest party in Parliament and the leader of the government. Johnson has resigned as the leader of the Conservative Party, the leader of the largest party in Parliament. He no longer has that job. He is no longer in charge of the Conservatives. And right now, the Conservatives are in the process of choosing a new leader. However, it takes time to choose the new leader. And this is why Johnson has not resigned as Prime Minister. The UK needs someone to lead it. While most people, or some people, wanted the Deputy Prime Minister to take over, in the end, the Conservatives decided Johnson could stay until his replacement was chosen. How do the Conservatives choose a new leader then? Well, first, the candidates for the job must be a Conservative Member of Parliament, and they have to be nominated by 20 different other Conservative Members of Parliament. I think about 9 MPs managed this step earlier in the month. Then there are two main stages to the competition. First, the candidates must be selected by other Conservative Members of Parliament. There are rounds of voting, with the candidate with the lowest support leaving the competition after each round of voting. Literally, as I'm writing this episode right now, there are 3 candidates left: Rishi Sunak, Penny Mordaunt, and Liz Truss. One other candidate, whose name I can't remember, just lost in the latest round of voting. However, the 2 final candidates may have been decided by the time this is released. The second stage of the competition is a vote by all of the members of the Conservative Party. There are around 180,000 Conservative Party members in the UK, and they will be able to choose the next leader of their party. You must be a member of the Conservatives to vote for their next leader. And by voting for the next leader of the Conservatives, you are basically voting for the next leader of the UK, the next Prime Minister. 3 years ago, when Theresa May resigned from the job, it took around 2 months for Boris Johnson to be chosen as the new leader. And it will probably take a similar amount of time for this decision. The new leader should be in place by September 5th. As I said earlier, there are currently 3 candidates left: Rishi Sunak, Penny Mordaunt, and Liz Truss. Rishi Sunak is the front runner, but we will have to wait until after the summer to find out the next Prime Minister of the UK. The new leader of the UK will not be chosen by a countrywide election, but instead by 180,000 members of the British Conservative Party. This can be quite confusing, but hopefully after listening to today's episode, you have a little better understanding. In summary, the Prime Minister is not elected directly in the UK. Instead, the leader of the largest political party in Parliament acts as the Prime Minister. And this means the UK can change leaders without needing a national election. The next Prime Minister will be decided over the summer, and they will have a difficult job. The economy is still a mess, inflation is soaring, and the pandemic is still an issue. How about in your country? How is the leader of your country chosen? Is it similar to the UK? Or perhaps more like America? Or is it different to both countries? Please let me know in the comments on Spotify, the comments on the Thinking in English blog, or you can send me a message on Instagram, Thinking in English podcast on Instagram. I love to get all of your messages. Please leave a like, a follow, a rating, a review wherever you are listening. Don't stop listening right now. There is a vocabulary list that is about to follow on from here. Yeah, check out the blog, check out my Instagram page, leave a like, recommend to a friend, and here is the vocabulary list for this episode. So here is today's vocabulary list. I'm currently trying a bit of an experiment, putting the vocabulary list at the end of the episode because I think it might increase the amount of people who listen to the entire episode. So I'm going to do an experiment for the next few weeks. Step down. Step down. To leave an important job or position. For example, he has decided to step down as captain of the team. Executive. Executive. The part of government that is responsible for making certain that laws and decisions are put into action. As in, the Prime Minister is in charge of the British executive. Scandal. Scandal. An action or event that causes a public feeling of shock and strong moral disapproval. For instance, their relationship caused a scandal in the office. To grope. To grope. To touch someone's body, usually when the other person does not like it. For instance, he was groped by a man at the bar. Accusation. Accusation. A statement saying that someone has done something morally wrong, illegal, or unkind. For example, he made accusations against his former employers. To handle. To handle. To deal with, have responsibility for, or be in charge of. As in, I thought he handled the situation very well. To nominate. To nominate. To officially suggest someone for an election, job, position, or honor. As in, would you like to nominate anyone for director? Candidate. Candidate. A candidate is a person who is competing to get a job or elected position. For example, there are 3 candidates standing in the election.